This mistake has been repeated more than 100 times. And right now, the largest economy on Earth is repeating it. Look at a world map. Most countries are colored yellow. Middle income. Not poor. Not rich. Somewhere in the middle. And here's the strange thing. Many of them have been there for 60 years. They grow. They build factories. They trade. But they don't become wealthy. Never. Why? Take Brazil. 60 years of growth. Its GDP growth rate in the 1970s was comparable to post-war Germany's. It was called the country of the future. People said, just a little more, and it will join the club of wealthy nations. And then 3 generations passed. The children of those who believed grew up, and their grandchildren. But Brazil is still there, still the country of the future. What's happening? In a few minutes, you'll find out why Korea broke out and Brazil did not. The answer isn't natural resources, and it isn't corruption. It's far more uncomfortable. 1960. Seoul lies in ruins after 10 years of war, famine, devastation. GDP per capita is $158. That's less than Ghana, less than Nigeria, less than most countries in Africa. Now look at Brazil in that same year. $210 per capita. Its new capital, Brasilia, has just been built from scratch out of concrete and ambition. The country believes in itself. The International Monetary Fund believes in it. The whole world believes. And it has everything. Land, resources, people, space. Here's a question. If in 1960 you were given the chance to put money on one of these 2 countries, which one would you bet on? Almost no one would have chosen Korea. And yet, Korea won. At first, both countries do the same thing. Build factories, hire cheap workers, make simple goods, textiles, shoes, cheap electronics, and sell them to rich countries. The strategy works. Both countries grow, GDP goes up, living standards rise. This is the first stage. But here's what happens next. And this is where the trap begins. When a country gets a little richer, workers want to be paid more. Wages rise. And suddenly, you can no longer compete with poorer countries on price. You're too expensive for cheap manufacturing. But you're still too poor and too inexperienced to make complex things. Airplanes, chips, medicines, software. You're stuck between 2 worlds. The door behind you has closed. The door ahead hasn't opened yet. Right at this moment, countries make a decision that determines everything. In 1973, the oil shock hits the global economy. Brazil faces a choice: restructure the economy or borrow money and buy time. It borrows. This is an understandable decision. This is a convenient decision. A decision that will bring it 2,700% inflation by 1989. Wait, 2,700%. This isn't Zimbabwe. This is Brazil, the country that 10 years earlier was called a tropical Germany. The government freezes citizens' bank accounts. People go to the bank, and their money is simply unavailable. A lifetime of savings, frozen by government decree. This is the consequence of the trap, not in some abstract form, but at the bank, in line, with a zero balance. Now look at what Korea does at the same time. In the 1970s, the Korean government makes a decision that looks insane. It picks industries that don't yet exist in the country: shipbuilding, steel production, heavy machinery, and orders private companies to enter them. It doesn't ask, it orders subsidies, loans, tax breaks in exchange for export results. Fail your exports, lose your support. And do you know what Korean engineers used to break into shipbuilding? They bought one engineer from a Japanese company. One person. His knowledge. That was the beginning. Hyundai, in 1975, rolls out the Pony, the first Korean car with its own design. Not a copy. Its own. In 7 years. From scratch. But then came 1997, and it nearly all collapsed. The Asian financial crisis swept the entire region in a few months. The Korean one fell. Companies went bankrupt. The International Monetary Fund stepped in with a $57 billion loan. At the time, it was the largest loan in the fund's history. The conditions were harsh. The country was on the brink. And then something happened that is hard to explain rationally. President Kim Dae-jung addressed the nation. He said, "We need gold, not metaphorically, literally, physical gold, to pay off our debts." 3.5 million Koreans came to collection points. They brought wedding rings, family heirlooms, medals, chains. 227 tons of gold in 3 months, and Korea repaid its debt to the International Monetary Fund 3 years early. But here, it's important to pause, because the story of the Korean miracle is not as clean as it seems. The Korean companies called chaebols got everything: subsidies, monopoly access to the market, state protection. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, they did not grow up through fair competition. Small business was sacrificed. In the 1970s, workers toiled 60, sometimes even 70 hours a week, without the right to strike, without unions. Development came at a huge human cost, a cost that doesn't make it into economics textbooks. According to the Labor Standards Act adopted in 1953, an 8-hour workday and a 48-hour workweek were established. However, the same law allowed that limit to be extended to 60 hours per week by mutual agreement. Average figures were high for many workers, especially those employed in labor-intensive sectors. But for some industries, conditions were truly inhuman. The garment industry. Female workers, including teenagers in clothing workshops, worked 11 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in textiles, electrical engineering, and other sectors, the workday could range from 13 to 16 hours. Young girls aged 12 to 15 had it especially hard. They toiled more than 16 hours a day in horrible conditions, with poor ventilation and lighting. This is not a story about an ideal model. This is a story about the price that had to be paid, and who exactly paid it. The 1970s in South Korea were a time of colossal contrast between labor laws and actual working conditions. The country achieved impressive economic success, but the cost was colossal. The Korean government summons Samsung's leadership and says, "You will enter memory chip production." The company's chairman thinks it's a disaster. Japan controls 70% of the global market. American companies hold the rest. There's no room for Korea. But the state insists. The money is allocated. Engineers are sent abroad to study. Technologies are bought under license. And 10 years later, in 1993, Samsung becomes the world's largest manufacturer of DRAM memory. Japan is pushed out. This is the answer to the question: what exactly did Korea do? It did not wait for the market to lead it to technology. It bought its way in by force, through state will, through state money, and through harsh demands for results. At the same time, Brazil did the opposite. In the 1970s, it banned the import of foreign computers to protect local manufacturers. The idea seemed reasonable. Protect your own, let them grow. But without competition, local manufacturers did not grow. They just collected rents. By the time the ban was lifted, Brazil was 15 years behind the global market. Now shift your focus to 2024. China. GDP per capita around $13,000. This is precisely the point where the trap's boundary lies. This is where Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Malaysia got stuck. This is where Korea and Taiwan broke out, and most others did not. And this is happening right now. Every decision Beijing makes in the next 10 years is the answer to the question, will China get stuck where Brazil got stuck? China has three problems that Korea did not have in the 1970s. A demographic crisis, the population is aging. A debt bubble in real estate, companies that provided a third of growth are now going bankrupt. And technology sanctions. The United States has cut off access to advanced semiconductors. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company cannot sell chips above a certain complexity level into China. The Dutch company ASML does not supply the equipment to make them. That is why China is investing more than $150 billion in its own semiconductor industry. This is the Korean strategy, literally, but China's scale is 100 times larger, and its opponents are 100 times stronger. Now about what truly determined the gap between Korea and Brazil. Not corruption, not luck, not natural resources. Korea began investing in universities earlier than it could afford to. In the 1960s, when the country was poorer than Ghana, the state was already building engineering schools. Brazil built its universities later. When the money appeared, a gap of one generation is a gap in destiny. An engineer trained in the 1970s creates technology in the 1980s. If you don't train him, that technology will never exist. The window closes. The second factor is embedded in how the institutions worked. Korean businesses could and did go bankrupt if they lost in the export market. Daewoo, one of the country's largest conglomerates, went bankrupt in 1999. The state did not bail it out. That created an incentive. In Brazil, protected monopolies knew the market wouldn't kill them, so there was no reason to become better. And the third factor, the harshest one, the window for a technological leap is narrow. You cannot open it by sheer willpower 20 years after it has closed. When cheap labor disappears, a country has roughly one generation to restructure. If you don't make it, you're in the trap. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because the moment has passed. In 1960, Korea was poorer than Brazil. Today, it is nearly 4 times richer. Taiwan, without a single oil field, without arable land, became the monopoly producer of the world's most complex microchips. Mexico has spent 30 years next to the world's largest economy and has a free trade agreement with it. And it's still stuck in the trap. The pattern is the same everywhere. Growth without transformation is not a way forward. It's running in place. And one last thing. The thing that is rarely said out loud. Of the roughly 100 middle-income countries in 1960, only 13 had broken into the high-income zone by 2008. 13 out of 100. Look at the map again. China. And the question hangs in the silence. Which path will it choose? If you had been running Brazil in 1975, would you have protected your factories? Or would you have bet everything on technologies you didn't yet know how to make?